Shalom Aleichem, Mishpuchim. We are in chapter 3, in Berachos. Mishnah elucidated. All right. This is Sefer Zerayim. Chapter 3, new chapter. Mishnah 1. This chapter continues the discussion begun in the previous chapter about people who are exempt from the obligation to say the Shema. The first two Mishnahs deal with exemptions that result from death and burial. If someone has his dead relative lying in front of him, a member of his family died, and he is obligated to bury the body, he is exempt from reciting the Shema, saying the Shemoni Esrei, and putting on tefillin until the body is buried. As long as he is busy planning and carrying out the burial, he is engaged in a mitzvah, and the rule is that someone who is engaged in one mitzvah is exempt from doing others. The Mishnah teaches the law applicable to the people who carry the stretcher on which the dead person lies. Since it is a mitzvah to take part in burying the deceased, it was common at funerals for people to take turns carrying the bier, so that as many people as possible could participate. For this purpose, the people were divided into groups. One group at a time would carry the bier, while the others would wait for their turn. Some groups are exempt from reciting the Shema, and some are obligated, as the Mishnah proceeds to explain. Those who are currently carrying the bier, their substitutes, the next group who are walking alongside the bier and waiting to take the first group's place, and the substitutes of the substitutes, the third group, who are also walking alongside the bier, and will take the second group's place, those walking in front of the bier, the people walking ahead of the bier as they wait for their turn, and those behind the bier, the people walking behind the bier who have already carried it or do not intend to carry it. Regarding all these people, the law is as follows. Those who are needed for the bier, those who are carrying the bier now or will carry it later, are not obligated to say the Shema because they are involved in the mitzvah of burying the dead. But those who are not needed for the bier, those who will not carry it later but are merely escorting it, are obligated to recite the Shema because they are not busy with the mitzvah. In any case, both those who are waiting to carry the bier and those who are merely escorting it are not obligated to recite the Shemoni Esrei. Mishnah 2. After a burial, the mourners would stand at a designated place near the cemetery. The others would line up in rows and walk in front of the mourners, offering words of comfort. The Mishnah discusses whether the comforters are required to recite the Shema. After they have buried the deceased and are returning from the cemetery to the area where they will form rows to comfort the mourners, the law is that if they can start reciting the Shema and finish it, at least the first verse, before they reach the area where the rows are formed, they should start reciting the Shema. But if the area where the rows are formed is so close to the grave that they will not be able to finish even the first verse before getting there, they should not even start reciting the Shema, since they are involved in a mitzvah, and they do not have the time to say the Shema as well. They are exempt from the mitzvah of Shema. The Mishnah teaches the law that applies once they are lined up in rows. This is the law of those who are standing in the rows. Those on the inner rows, who can see the mourners, are exempt from reciting the Shema because they are performing the mitzvah of comforting the mourners. But those on the outside rows who cannot see the mourners are obligated to recite the Shema because they cannot comfort mourners from that position. And that concludes Mishnah 1 and 2 in chapter 3 of Berachos. All right, have a wonderful night. Laila Tov, Shavua Tov.